Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly webcast with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is December 9th, 2022, and Helga, it's been a busy few days, especially for you. There were two events that occurred in the last couple of days. One was an interview with the preeminent television talk show host in Russia, Vladimir Solovyov, where he asked you about the 10 fundamental principles that you drafted. And then there was the award bestowed on you in the Schiller Institute by the Journalists Club of Mexico, the Freedom of Expression Award. So why don't we start with the Solovyov interview? This was really quite important, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it's one of the major talk shows in the Russian TV. And I think it's very important that Mr. Solovyev obviously has looked quite in detail at the 10 principles I proposed to have a new international security and development architecture. And he said it was very thought through. And, I think in general he came across with the idea that there is hope, that a diplomatic solution can be found. So I think it was important that, now millions of Russians know about these 10 principles. And since we are also spreading it elsewhere, I'm quite optimistic that, hopefully we can put it on the international agenda.
I think it's important at the end, he said, I hope you succeed. And I think the award from the Journalist Club of Mexico City is also something which is part of the spread of these ideas.
Yes, I think Mrs. Celeste Saim, the chairwoman of the very prestigious Mexican Journalist Association, basically in her opening speech mentioned the fact that it's an outrageous scandal that that myself and others are on this Ukrainian list. And she said that the Schiller Institute's work is extremely important, in times where the freedom of speech is not guaranteed. So I'm very happy about this award because sometimes you're not profit is not appreciated in his or her own country, but Mexico is one of my favorite countries anyway. So that's very, very good.
Well, mine too, having lived in Texas for years and done a lot of work in Mexico. It's a very interesting country and very beautiful. Now, in terms of the spread of these ideas, I think it's quite important to look at the motion toward the new financial and strategic architecture. This week, Xi Jinping was in Saudi Arabia for meetings with a number of Middle Eastern countries. This is an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative, but also the new diplomacy. What do you make of this?
Well, I think this is really important because, this has been, in one sense, prepared since Xi Jinping visited the Middle East several years ago when he went to Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. And this time he's participating in three summits, one with the Saudi government, one with the Arab states, and one with the Gulf Cooperation Council. And the Chinese foreign ministry spokeswoman basically said this is an epochal, historic visit. It puts the Chinese Arab, Chinese Saudi relationship on a completely new strategic level. And generally, the press coverage and observers are saying that the Arabs are turning east. Now, that is obviously very big. Not only was in this visit with Saudi Arabia economic deals of 30 billion concluded, 34 contracts. China imports 25% of the Saudi export of crude oil. But I think even more important than that is the fact that Xi Jinping was treated with top honors. Six Saudi fighter jets accompanied his plane, and they colored the sky with the colors of the Chinese flag, that is red and gold. And, that is in total contrast to the rather subdued way how Biden was treated a little while ago when he visited. And it is very clear that, there is a new strategic alignment going on. This involves the whole BRICS dynamic, because it is now many countries who want to join the BRICS Plus. That is Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, um, Algeria, Turkey, Iran, and Foreign Minister Lavrov said that there are altogether 17 countries who have lined up and applied for full membership in the BRICS. Already now, the BRICS has a GDP which is larger than that of the G7, and if you add all of these countries, it is very clear that the power center of the world economy, which already has shifted to Asia, will be amplified a lot in the direction of the countries of the BRICS plus the countries who work with this organization, which is very quickly growing. So I think this is very important, and it, in one sense, revives the spirit of the ancient Silk Road, because the Chinese-Arab relation date back about 2,000 years, and obviously it will have an impact on the entire dynamic in the Middle East. Also important is that Xi Jinping had, I think, meetings with 40 leaders from regional countries, including the new Prime Minister of Iraq, al-Sudani, and there also a strategic partnership was agreed, and I think the oil for technology agreement, which existed before but which was dormant because of all kinds of sabotage and intervening problems. But that means also that Iraq is now looking in the direction of cooperation with the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think that the Western countries, rather than trying to fight this, which they continue to do with all kinds of racist statements like coming from Chatham House almost every day, they would do so much better if they would adjust to this new emerging reality, give up the geopolitical confrontation, and rather, start to cooperate. I mean, this is a new world economic order which is emerging, and it is based on non-interference in the internal affairs of the other one. It's based on respect for the sovereignty of the other one, non-meddling with the social system. And this is just a much more durable concept for peace in the world than what we have seen with the right to protect and the humanitarian interventions, especially with the wars against Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, which only resulted into millions of people dying for nothing, 70 million refugees. I mean, this is the biggest human rights violation which you can imagine. Obviously, this is not being discussed, but I think that the West should really draw the conclusion out of the failed policies of the last decades and join this new arrangement which is emerging and which brings hope for many million people, in the entire region. So I'm actually quite optimistic that this is a very, very important game changer in the entire region and beyond.
Well, and it reflects what you just wrote in your article on the spirit of Bandung, which is being published in a book, which I should have mentioned at the outset that this is coming out now. But it also raises the question that you just brought up. Why would the West be angry or upset as though they're being betrayed by countries looking out for their own interests and moving into this new architecture? Now, in that context, we had this statement from a Trilateral Commission member from Japan who raised the question of why are you forcing us to choose? I mean, this is a completely absurd approach from the West, but it's a self-isolation, isn't it?
Well, given the fact that the Trilateral Commission is an organization which is basically representing the establishment. And then somebody from Japan saying, don't force us to choose, because if we have to choose, we will choose China over the United States. I think this is also a sign of the times.
Now, we have a very interesting story unfolding in Germany of the attempted coup that the German police supposedly foiled. I think there were 3,000 police and security officials involved in it. What do you know about this, Helga?
Well, this is on the one side a farce, but it naturally has a serious background. The farcical part of it is that this was the biggest raid in the history of the Federal Republic since the Second World War. 3,000 police, special intervention units, the SEK, and various other units. They raided, I think, altogether 130 apartments. They arrested 25 people. I mean, this was because supposedly they had information that the Reichsbürger, this is an organization of people or an association of people who do not recognize, who basically say that the Federal Republic of Germany does not exist. And, since we never had a peace treaty, and there was never a referendum on a new constitution, they say that the old Kaiserreich, basically, or the old Weimar Republic, whatever, still exists, or they want to go back to a monarchy. And, I mean, there may be 20,000 people in Germany who believe this. Most of them, and that is also shown by the pictures, are pensioners, gray-haired people. Supposedly, they were planning a coup, that they were planning to take over the government. Now, I mean, I think this is a PR stunt if you ever have seen one, because one parliamentarian of the Linkspartei said that she knew about this 2 weeks ahead, as she also knew that many of the media were informed. Selected mainstream media knew about it. They had time to prepare background articles, which suddenly miraculously were published on the day of the raid. So everything was there. The media was in the deployments of the police, filming everything. It was the big story. So, I mean, if these people, these Reichsbürger, would have been that dangerous and, with weapons and everything, maybe they have some weapons, but it's so out of proportion. If they would have been so absolutely dangerous, then the police should have been very secretive, not warning anybody ahead of time. But obviously, the purpose of this was something quite different. The purpose was to discredit these Reichsbürger and all the other demonstrators, which, I mean, we should not forget the role of the Verfassungsschutz in previous deployments of the NSU and other right-wing deployments. So this is a very dubious thing, and obviously, it is, it's like you take something which has a little kernel of reality, but then you blow it up in such a way to discredit the whole thing. And everybody knows that there are many people taking to the streets because of the sanctions. They feel it's a blowback on the German economy. Many firms are going bankrupt. The energy prices go through the roof. People are afraid of inflation. Many people fear that they don't get through the winter because of the exploding energy prices. So there is a total social ferment, and therefore, if you do such a staged, what looks like a staged operation beforehand, you discredit that kind of protest. And when Interior Minister Faeser said, "We were looking into the abyss of a terrorist threat," with all of these people with their, sticks and rollators, and it's just not real, And I think the former president of Russia, Medvedev, made also a total satire out of it, because naturally also Russia was blamed again that they have some hand in that. But the White House naturally immediately offered support, because, these are people who believe the same QAnon conspiracy narratives. And this is exactly like January 6th, the raid on the Capitol. Now that is also very questionable, because, there are a lot of questions arose of how this was staged. So, I think it has a serious background that it's being staged because, there is a social ferment. But I think, we should really keep a clear head about it.
And it occurs at a moment where the German government is losing popularity. The new polls that are coming out are showing that they're dropping fairly quickly, like a rock in water. And at this point, you have Scholz and Habeck and Foreign Minister Baerbock taking the point against China. How does this fit into the situation?
Well, Scholz went to China. He also keeps saying that he is not for breaking off relations with China and so forth. So he has a slightly different position. But, we have learned from people who are in the, business, that Baerbock, whose foreign ministry has prepared a China paper, she apparently, I mean, I can only say we have this from a source. She apparently sent out her paper to all the German embassies internationally, pretending that this was already accepted German policy. So I thought that the chancellor defines the rules for foreign policy, and one has to see, if this so-called foreign minister decides what the policy of Germany is, or the chancellor. In any case, this is completely idiotic. If Germany wants to really commit harakiri, then they should continue to alienate China. And, I think Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia hopefully wakes some people up that the momentum is not against China, but that it is with China. And, I hope that this is a wake-up call for some people.
Also, news from Germany was this admission by Merkel that the Minsk agreement was designed to buy time. That was said by Poroshenko before. Now it's from Merkel. This casts the whole situation of the pre-special military operation by Russia in a completely different light, doesn't it?
Well, I think this is really incredible, because we always made the point, that Germany and France, who were supposed to be the countries enforcing or encouraging the Minsk agreement, and we always said they didn't do anything. But now it turns out Merkel said it in two interviews, one with Spiegel and then again with Die Zeit, that there was no intention to go ahead with Minsk too. That there was an intention to gain time for the Ukraine to rearm and become stronger. And so, I mean, this is incredible. And Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the foreign ministry in Russia, correctly said that this means that the whole credibility of Germany is completely destroyed. That Merkel has admitted that she was not intending to work for peace, but that the idea was to basically use lies and manipulation to prepare for war. Now, this is incredible, and I think it should put at rest for good this idea that Putin attacked Ukraine without a reason and out of the blue. I mean, obviously, if Merkel is now admitted, as Poroshenko did, that they were just lying to Russia, misleading Russia, in order to arm the Ukrainian troops on a NATO standard, this is rewriting this whole, or putting the truth into the whole story, and it shows the lies. Now, this is dangerous because Putin, obviously knows about that as well. And he said that he now thinks it was a mistake to wait for eight years to react to the attacks on Donbass by the Ukrainian army, which caused 14,000 people to die, and about which Russia had complained many times to the OSCE, and the OSCE had never done anything about it. And Putin says he now thinks it was a mistake. He should have reacted to the coup in 2014 militarily immediately, and this is also, it has strategic implications when you do that. So Putin is now also saying that, the fact that the United States are putting all these modernized tactical nuclear weapons into Germany basically may force them to rethink the Russian nuclear doctrine, which says that Russia will never do a first strike, because they only will use nuclear weapons when the existence of the Russian territory is at stake. Now, he says putting these weapons in such close vicinity to the Russian border means that Russia may not have time to go for a second strike. I mean, this is really escalating the spiral towards nuclear war, and it is just totally disgusting.
You also have the discussion underway about the Ukrainian strikes on Russian air bases. Some people are saying this is a provocation to force Russia to respond that would lead then to a further escalation. So it does appear as though the whole situation is escalating as you have been warning. Now, there was an event yesterday by Chatham House on Russia against the world, basically. And what they laid out was this racist view that Russia has an imperial doctrine that predates Putin, that this is the danger. And this, of course, fits in with the talking points that have come from the British from the beginning. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the video, but what do you make of this kind of discussion going on now in this context?
Well, it just is one more confirmation that it's again and again the British who are instigating the escalation. As Boris Johnson, he personally in April flew into Kiev to sabotage the then existing negotiations to which Zelensky had already agreed. And you can actually say that it was Boris Johnson's credit that 100,000 people have died since, also, Ukrainians. So, this is just totally disgusting. And I think this double standard, people should really look at that. The former Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia, Paroubek, he just came out and said that all this upsetness about the Russia attacking the infrastructure in Ukraine, targeting the electricity supplies, that this is completely phony. And then he quotes, the NATO spokesman from the time of the 1999 NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. His name was Shia, who said, yeah, sure, we are bombing the electricity because that's also used by the military. And, basically, this is completely legitimate to do. So Paroubek says, that after these statements, you cannot apply a double standard because Russia just learned from NATO what you do in such a situation.
Not to mention what was done in Iraq by the United States and NATO. Now, Helga, this does bring us back to what we started with, which is the importance of the 10 fundamental principles that you laid out to move to a new strategic and financial architecture. I know there's a lot of discussion that's going on. It has to continue, in fact, be raised to a higher level, and it should be discussed by governments. But what's your sense of where we have to go from here to bring these ideas into the policies of governments?
Well, I'm quite encouraged because a lot of people who have looked at these 10 principles are reacting very well. They say it's a very serious and well thought through conception because, these 10 principles are not programmatic points. They are principles, and I try to look at the situation and say, what must be remedied, which prevents peace. And I took the Peace of Westphalia as an example, where one of the principles which was coming out of that was the idea that in order, if you want to have peace, you have to take into account the interest of the other. There can be no lasting peace if one or two or more parties are neglected. Now, that's a very important principle. So my 10 principles start off with the idea that you have to have an alliance of perfectly sovereign nations, because otherwise you have no accountability. Supranational institutions just don't work. So the principle of sovereignty is the first idea. Then the idea of overcoming poverty as the most important task, because if there are 2 billion people threatened with starvation, that is right now the most urgent task. Naturally, a world health system. And then the second part, basically goes into the philosophical um, considerations which have to be the underpinning of such an approach. And I refer to those conceptions in the different cultures which say that there is a higher lawfulness which has to be respected, which in European history was called natural law. In India, it's called cosmology, which needs to be applied on the planet. In China, it's called the mandate of heaven. So these are important ideas. I refer in one principle to Cusanus' coincidence of opposites as a way of thinking. How can you think the one which has a higher power than the many, the one humanity which is more important than the many nations? And then finally, the 10th point is that the nature of man is that man is essentially good and that all evil comes from a lack of development. Now, I'm just referencing it very briefly, but I think these ideas must be discussed, because we have to come to principles which unite humanity and not divide it. So I would encourage you, our viewers, to read these principles. And if you want, write something about it. We will introduce on the Schiller website a subpage where important articles which will be contributed will be published, and then hopefully we get other organizations to enter such a dialogue, because we need actually a chorus of world citizens who say we need a change in the paradigm, because if we are going into nuclear war, then there will be nobody left. So that means that everybody has to take responsibility to remedy this present very dangerous but also very hopeful situation and bring it to a better direction.
And the responses that I've been getting are people who are saying initially, well, but this is hard to do on a philosophical level. But then you ask them, how far has pragmatism and realpolitik gotten us? That's why we're in this crisis. And in fact, you only overcome this kind of crisis by moving to the higher basis for agreement. So, Helga, thanks for joining us today. I think the developments of this last week, including the interviews that you and your associates are doing, the award in Mexico, the developments around China and the Middle East, all point in a hopeful direction. But we still have to engage more people in this process. And the fundamental principles drafted by Helga will be appended to the webcast today at the bottom of the description section so you can read them and comment on them. So, Helga, thanks for joining us, and see you again next week.
Yes, till next week.